convener, and the members, other members of the committee, both here and remote, and officers both here and remote, may I extend a very warm welcome to this planning committee held here in the Grangemouth Community Education Unit in Abbots Road, Grangemouth. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003, it has been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. The meeting will also be live streamed. First of all, can we ask if there's any apologies?
Thank you, Convener. We have no apologies submitted, Convener. Thank you.
Any apologies from the floor or remote? None? Okay, thank you. That takes us to item 2 on your agenda this morning, which is declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? No? Thank you very much. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda. It's a minute of the meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 18th of October. It's pages 3 to 11 in your agenda papers. Have we any questions arising from that minute? None? Fine, that's fine. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 4. And before we go to item 4, I'll just say that item 4 and item 5 were subject of site visits. Unfortunately, I could not attend the original site visit, but later on in that week, I had an opportunity to go with the officers to the site. So I'm well versed with both of them because I felt it was really important to see the physicality and the issues regarding. So that takes us to item 4, which is construction of dwelling house at Romwell, Gramsdyke Lane, Bowness, for Mr. James Adamson. It's pages 12 to 37. Now, just to say at the very start, before we bring Mr. Vivian in for the report, that a deputation request has been made by Gareth Jones, the agent, to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. Are we agreed to allow Mr. Jones to speak? Agreed. Great, thank you. Okay, then the report is by Brent Vivian. Thank you, Mr. Vivian.
Thank you, Convener.
So, excuse me a minute, Councillor Nimmo, you get your hand up?
Thanks, Convener. It's just for Mr. Henderson to clarify something for me. I wasn't in attendance at the previous meeting, and I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate for me to take part in this item of business.
Thank you, Councillor Nimmo. As I recall, there wasn't a substantive discussion on the matter at the last meeting. It was moved to sites fairly early at the last meeting. And I think that's correct, Convener. There wasn't a substantive discussion. And on that basis, were you in attendance? Have you seen the sites or are you familiar with the sites?
I haven't been to the site visits.
You haven't been to the site visits, but
No.
You'll have the benefit of the report before you, and no doubt there'll be some visuals that will be displayed by the planning officer. And I think it's really for you to consider in the circumstances whether or not you feel you're able to take part. But I would just clarify that there was no substantive discussion, and it's not absolutely mandatory to go to a physical inspection of the site, but it is for a member to consider their position in that regard and in the basis of the information that will be presented by officers at this morning's meeting. Thanks, Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks for clarifying that, Ian. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Nimmo. We'll just clarify the situation again. It's item 4, construction of dwelling house at Romwell, Gramsdyke Lane, Bowness, for Mr. James Adamson, pages 12 to 37. And the report will be by Mr. Brent Vivian. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, Convener. This application is for the construction of a 4-bedroom dwelling house with basement, ground and first floor levels. Members will recall that the committee considered the application on the 18th of October when it was agreed to continue the application to allow the committee to carry out a site visit to view the physical characteristics.
Excuse me, Brent, could you maybe turn your volume up a wee bit? We have quite a number of people in the back here, and I'm finding it difficult to hear you as well. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so as I was saying, members will recall that the committee considered the application on the 18th of October when it was agreed to continue the application to allow the committee to carry out a site visit to view the physical characteristics of the site. The site visit took place on the 30th of October. At the site visit, the case officer advised that the site lies within the Grange Terrace Conservation Area, the Antonine Wall World Heritage Site, and the Grange Terrace Tree Preservation Order. The committee observed that the site is vacant and overgrown and enclosed by trees and hedgerows, and were shown the three most notable trees on the site, being a birch tree and 2 beech trees. Committee were also advised the site was previously occupied by a bungalow, and planning permission was granted on appeal in 2007 for a 2-storey dwelling house. The committee was shown the application drawings, including the site plan, showing the proposed dwelling house orientated to face northwest, and the elevations. These drawings can be shared should committee wish to view any of them. The previous report summarised the consultation responses and the representations received, and provided a planning assessment against National Planning Framework 4 and the Local Development Plan. The only concerns raised in the consultation responses were by the Roads Development Unit and related to the location of the site entrance at a tight junction on a route for primary school children. This is the long-established site entrance and was deemed suitable in the appeal decision from 2007. Historic Environment Scotland have no objection to the application and accept the findings of the archaeological evaluation that the site has been extensively levelled and there is no evidence of the line of the Antonine Wall in this area. 9 public representations were received, consisting of 7 objections and 2 in support. The concerns raised in the objections included impacts on the character and appearance of the conservation area and the historic environment, visual impacts, amenity and privacy impacts, nature conservation impacts, including the loss of existing landscape features, construction-related impacts, access road safety and traffic concerns, and flooding and drainage concerns. The planning assessment concludes that overall the proposal complies with the development plan. It is assessed that the architectural style of the proposed dwelling house is acceptable within this conservation area, given the variety of styles of dwellings within the immediate area and as a contemporary interpretation. The overall landscape proposals would compensate for the loss of existing trees and maintain the landscape contribution of the site to the amenity of the conservation area. And the combination of the orientation of the proposed dwelling house and the distances to the houses to the north ensure that any impacts on the privacy of these properties would not be considered significant. At the site visit, it was queried whether all trees on the site are subject to the TPO. It is confirmed that all trees existing on the site at the time of registering of the TPO are covered by the TPO. The TPO was registered in 1982 and records 59 groups of trees. In addition, removal of any tree within a conservation area requires the authorisation of the planning authority if it has a diameter of at least 7.5 centimetres, measured at a height of 1.5 metres above ground level. However, any tree work or tree removal included in the grant of planning permission would override the requirement to obtain separate authorisation from the planning authority. It is considered that no new matters were raised at the committee site visit that would alter the previous recommendation to grant planning permission. The recommendation set out in the previous report to grant planning permission subject to conditions is therefore reiterated. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Vivian. An opportunity now for Gareth Jones, the agent, to be received as a deputation if Mr. Jones would like to step forward. Take a seat. Yep. Yeah, it's fine. Just bring your mic close to yourself and just press. You'll have 10 minutes and then there'll be an opportunity for members to ask any questions. So you have 10 minutes starting now. Thank you, sir.
Hello. Well, hopefully I won't take 10 minutes. I think Brent has probably covered most of what I wanted to say anyway, or might have wanted to say. This is an application for a site that we've been involved with for a number of years. Rumwall, which was the name of the house, which kind of misleadingly Roman wall, it was an abbreviation of that. Rumwall was a bungalow that was built in the 1950s or 60s. It was demolished prior to the applicant purchasing the site. It was purchased in 2014 for development for the applicant's own family. Initially, the proposal was to construct 2 houses on the site, but family situation has changed and he's now looking to build a single house for himself and his immediate family. Rumwall itself was a bungalow, as Vivian said, as Brent said, sorry, with an attic extension, garage and landscape grounds. There's lots of concrete paving around the house, etc. So it was all demolished in order to make way for the previously consented house. Some of it was retained, however, principally retaining walls and the driveway. So where if you've been on site, you'll have probably seen the entrance drive, which comes out right on the eastern corner of the property. So the previous application, the original application, sorry, for a house was consented in 2007, I think, at appeal. It was renewed in 2011, and the applicant has previously made an application to Falkirk Council for 2 houses on the site. This is a reduction on that original or previous application. So the single house is intended to maintain the physical parameters of the consented property, so the property that gained consent at appeal. The ridge level of the new house is below the ridge level of the houses that are to the south side of the site. Obviously, it sits on quite a steep slope, as you'll have seen. It's above the ridge level of the houses on Grange Terrace, but of course, Grange Terrace is some way further down the hill to the site itself. It sort of sits in the middle. I don't think the site was developed extensively until the bungalow was built. It's shown on all the historical maps as being vacant right the way through. In fact, similarly, Grahamsdyke Lane that it sits on is a relatively recent introduction. I think it was probably added about 1900 to the street plan. It's slightly unfortunate that it's been picked up as the potential route of the Antonine Wall. And Jeff Bailey did quite a lot of work on this, and including leading the archaeological excavations on this site. His conclusion, both from the AOC excavations that the applicant undertook and from other research that's been done in the area, is that the wall probably didn't follow the lane of the lane's alignment and continued on probably further to the east than was presumed. I think it's largely because the Bridgeness slab has been discovered further down the hill. It was presumed that the alignment was there. There was quite a thorough excavation done on the site. There were 3 trenches dug, and there was no evidence of anything of Roman origin, certainly. The likelihood was that the wall was actually higher up, following the line of the now Grahamsdyke Road. Brent also mentioned here that we had comments from the Roads Department and indeed from some of the neighbouring properties. The access to the site is on the corner. That forms quite an acute angle, both with Grahamsdyke Lane and the private access road that runs to the south side of the houses on Grahamsdyke Terrace. That's the access to the site that seems to have been formed for the bungalow in the 1950s or 1960s. Unfortunately, although I don't think it's particularly a problem, but there isn't any right for the site to access either Grahamsdyke Lane anywhere else. Grahamsdyke Lane is higher and it rises substantially higher than the site, or to the private access road that runs to the north. So the access that's there at the moment is the access that we would intend to maintain. And you'll see it's still tarmacked and it's still serviceable. In fact, any vehicle movements onto the site use that. I think there's been concerns about the amount of traffic and the speed. Traffic speeds are very low in the lane. In fact, the lane effectively is blocked. It only serves a couple of properties, and further down, it's only serving the garages to the other houses. Speeds are low. Sightlines aren't terribly bad. They'll be improved substantially by clearance of some of the scrub vegetation. And if necessary, there are other measures that could be taken, perhaps to delineate the edge of the site, so that somebody coming from the house, the new house, would be able to stop, look left and right before continuing onto the road. There were other comments received. I don't think I need to go into them. Brent has covered them. A couple of comments. One was from the flooding team, but we've commissioned a flood assessment, a drainage impact assessment, which the engineers are looking at now. There are a couple of other points. The Grange Conservation Area was raised as well. Just to note that we had quite a helpful and constructive criticism, I'll call it criticism, from the council's own urban design officer. We took those on board and we've altered the design to correspond with their comments. So the application has been altered prior to its original submission to take account of the comments of the urban design officer. I don't know if there's terribly much more that I need to mention. The trees were mentioned briefly there by Brent as well. The plan is to retain as many of the mature trees as we can, to remove the scrub vegetation and the old overgrown garden vegetation, and to tidy the hedges so that the site will still be screened both from the private lane and from Graham's Dyke Lane. The tree survey was undertaken by Chris Knapman, who's quite a well-known arboriculturalist, and he spent quite a lot of time looking and thinking about how the site could best be treated. Summary, I don't think that the proposal contravenes any of the local or national policies, as Brent pointed out, including the conservation area or the Antonine Wall legislation. It's been approved by the council's urban design officer, and the former archaeologist Jeff Bailey was quite involved in the site and concluded that there was nothing to be concerned about in terms of the Antonine Wall. Committee report outlines a number of conditions that the applicant is quite happy to accept, and they'll further ensure that the consented scheme hopefully complies with all of those policies. I don't want to say any more, and I'm happy to answer any questions if the committee has any for me.
Okay, thank you, sir, for that. I will just sit there just now. What I'm doing just now is I'm asking Gemma and also our officer, and I'm going back to Mr. Vivian. Have you got any photographs that maybe we could put up that maybe help Councillor Nimmo to see where he's going to take part in the decision making? Brent?
Yeah, there's photos. I think probably Jack, is it, that could share the photos?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Okay.
You could maybe, as you come up, if you can maybe do an explanation of them.
Yeah, that photo there is looking west, and it shows the site just on the left-hand side, where the fence is shown at the site entrance on the left, and this shows the back of the properties to the north, where a number of the objectors reside, and you'll notice there's a number of garages which front the lane on that side, with the houses on the properties being further to the north. Next one.
Any more photographs? Yeah.
That's Graham's Dyke Lane. That's actually looking from the other direction. That's looking eastwards from further up the lane, with the property being further down on the left-hand side. You can see a tree without any leaves. That's one of the notable trees on the application site. And this is looking west from Graham's Dyke Lane, and the site is straight ahead. You can see several notable trees on the site, and you can also pick up the site entrance with the private lane off to the right, and Graham's Dyke Lane continuing to the left of the site. So okay, that's the photos. There's the photos that we have. We also have drawings of the proposed house and the site layout plan if Councillor Nimmo would also like to see those.
Yeah, I think it'd be appropriate.
That's a location plan which shows the proposed house in its setting. It's orientated northwest, and you can see its relationship to the houses to the north, and in particular, and also to the properties to the south.
Okay.
So yeah, there should also be the elevation drawings as well, Jack. We might play just to quickly share those too. So that's the south elevation and the east elevation. You can see the basement level there in the east elevation with the entrance into the garage. So that will be retained by a 2.6 metre high wall. So there will be some excavations on the site to lower ground levels to achieve the basement level. And there should be one further elevation drawing which shows the principal elevation to the north. There it is. That's the top drawing, shows the northwest facing elevation and also the west elevation. Thanks, Jack.
Okay, thank you for that, Brent and Jack. It's now an opportunity at this stage to ask members of the committee to ask any questions of the agent at this point. Councillor Browse?
How did you know?
I'm psychic, as you know.
I was on the site visit. It's interesting that Brent had said that there had been a property actually there previously, which actually makes quite a bit of difference because there'll be existing fines, but I know that all need to change. One of the questions that we explored when we were there, and I would like to hear, well, two questions actually, is on the tree side, because there's when you read the report, it sounds as if all the trees are all going to get cut away, and but Brent and described very, very well on site how the north side hedges will get taken down to 2 metres. I think it was what he said. There will be one tree that will come away, but that's because it's really badly. It was in quite bad condition, but others will just be trimmed back. Is that right? I'll ask you another question as well. So I appreciate there's been reports on the historic side. If this was to be approved, will there be ongoing work, monitoring in case you come across something? Because obviously we have a 3-storey house, you're going to be digging down further. There's going to be foundations are going to be a lot bigger for what would have been for a bungalow. So will there be ongoing care with regards to the historic environment? I appreciate you said that the Antonine Wall doesn't tie up there, but there's a good potential, obviously, then that there was people about at that time.
Yes, first of all, on the trees, yes, it's selective pruning of the trees and the hedges. So the applicant's quite keen, obviously, to keep the site with its boundaries largely intact if possible. There is one tree coming out. The previous application actually showed more work to the trees. We've asked Chris to have another look at it, and he's reassessed, and he's actually reduced the extent of tree work from what was previously considered. On the historic nature of the site, yes, there have been fines on the site overall. The AOC were commissioned. In fact, they had Jeff in attendance, and he helped with the brief for the excavations. They didn't find anything, other than the fact that the rock level is very close, so bedrock is very close to the surface over much of the site. We don't expect to find anything, but I'm sure the applicant would be happy to accept if there was some monitoring of the excavation for the foundations of the house or any other work, then I'm sure we'd be happy to do that. I don't think you could go anywhere in Bowness and not find something or other, given its long period of habitation, as you say. So we haven't included that, but we can do certainly if that needs to be added.
One last question. The actual building itself, and Brent sort of touched on it in the second set of drawings when he talked about the northwest face. So am I right in saying that the property doesn't sit one face going south, one face going north, one face going east, one face going west, it actually skewed slightly. So the main view actually would be, rather than directly onto the houses behind it, actually goes down the lane. It was something we picked up when we were there, and we were looking at that. The overlook would actually be towards the bottom end of on the north side, rather than directly north.
Yes, it's not looking directly north. You're right. Yes.
Thank you for your input there, sir. Any other questions to the agent at this stage? Councillor Nimmo. Yes.
Thanks, convener. The agent made mention of the Grange Conservation Area Management Plan, and he said that changes had been made so that it would comply with this plan. Could the agent maybe just expand a bit on that and what changes were actually made?
Yes, there were some issues raised regarding materials, so we changed some of the materials used on the building to, I'll say, to reflect. There's a big mix of different types of properties, both on Grange Terrace and around to the south side of the site. There are quite a number of 1960s, 70s properties. Similarly, there are Edwardian houses and there are Victorian houses as well. We changed the materials on the house itself. The render, we've now got a self-coloured render. We've got slate roofing. So they were changes that were made to reflect largely the concerns of the urban design officer. And in turn, she was responding to the management plan for the conservation area.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. Convener, just a general point as well, that this management plan's listed as one of the background papers on page 35. And there's also a phone number on page 18. I take it it's for public access to the background papers. Are all these background papers available online as well?
Maybe go to Brent on this one. You've heard the question, Brent. Is these background papers available online? Do you know?
The background papers cover the local development plan, national planning framework, a number of our.
The management plan is available online. I got it online.
Okay. Anything else, Councillor Nimmo?
No, that's fine. Thanks, convener.
Well, thanks for your input, sir. Any other questions then to the agent? Okay, what I'll do is I'll go back to Mr. Vivian. You've heard the question, you've heard the summary, and just go back to you just to give us your insight into what you've heard to see whether there'll be any changes in the determination by yourself. Thank you, sir.
The only potential change, I think, to the recommendation and the conditions set out would potentially be an additional condition. We'd have to work through the detail of the wording, obviously, but it would relate to potentially to monitoring the work on site to cover any potential for archaeological discovery.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I'd be quite happy at this stage then to move the recommendation contained within the report and the conditions as set out, plus the additional monitoring situation during any works taking place.
Agreed.
Okay, Mr. Henderson wants in at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, convener, and thanks for your forbearance letting me come in there. It was just as Brent was saying, the wording of the condition around monitoring would require to be worked up, and I would just suggest and seek agreement that that be a matter that's delegated to the Director of Police Services to achieve that wording.
Agreed.
Okay, just hold on a second and we'll conclude this once this the gentleman goes back to his seat. Thank you. Okay, just to clarify once again, I'll formally move we agree the recommendation contained within the report with the conditions plus the additional condition that's already been put forward. Councillor Bowes.
I'm happy to second you with the archaeological monitoring going forward. I think that was point on that is to make sure that we don't end up just destroying something that's maybe down below.
Okay, then, we've had, just to clarify, we have a motion moved and seconded. Is there anybody otherwise minded?
No.
Nope. So we're agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Convener.
Yes.
So just before you move on to other item, I didn't want to interrupt in the item itself. I think we had discussion before in the committee about in general practice about the use of, for example, drone, Google Maps, etc. And I think that where it was really helpful as you prompted for those drawings to be shown, for the pictures to be shown, and many of these are available online on the linked planning paper, which is also really helpful as we've got that. But I do wonder if maybe officers could take a wee action. I think we did agree about exploring the potential of using that sort of live information as sitting here. It's very useful to be able to see the live Google map in 3D about how it's situated, and also to be able to view those papers. So I know that sometimes we have issues with the recent Teams update and member share, that perhaps we could maybe officers look at that, because I think we did say that having these availability is quite helpful in the decision making process. And I know Councillor Nimmo wasn't able to get to site, for example, or be here, and I think that would be helpful and appropriate for decision making. So that would be useful if you could take a note if that was agreeable for officers to maybe review that again, as we did ask whether that was possible.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure that Officer Mr. Dryden will pick that up. It's a very good and valid point. Okay, then, any other questions then before we move on to the next item? No? Okay, that takes us to item 5 on your agenda this morning. Change of use from house class 9 to residential institution class 8 at Lindeen, 15 Windsor Drive, Falkirk, FK15QN for Aberlour Trust. It's a continuation because obviously there was a site visit. It's pages 38 to 59 on your agenda papers, and the report will be summarised by our Officer Catherine Chorley. But before she does this, just to say that there's a number of deputation requests, and just so that we don't get mixed up, we'll go through them one by one. An application has been made by Andrew Kayla, the agent to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. Are we agreeing to Andrew Kayla to be allowed to speak?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you.
Agreed.
There, an application has been made by Sally Ann Kelly, Aberlour Trust, the applicant to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. Have we agreed to hear Sally Ann Kelly as a deputation?
Convener,
Agreed.
Yes, indeed.
just before everybody does agree, if the applicant's agent is going to be there, is the applicant going to be saying something particularly different from their agent? Or are we given 10 minutes for one and 10 minutes for the other?
Well, that's a valid point. I think it'd be maybe an opportunity for both to go up together.
Yeah.
I think that would be advantageous if members were agreed that
I'm not trying to disadvantage.
No.
It's
It's a valid point. What we'll do is we'll just hold fire for a second, then Mr. Henderson can go back in, but I would say the same. I think that both of them should go up together, because obviously they're singing for the same hymn sheet, if you would clarify that. Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks for bringing me in. Just looking at our standing orders, and I think as matters that we're not entirely certain if there's a commonality of matters that will be looking to be raised in their deputations. I do note at Standing Order 33.6 that if the meeting decides to hear more than one deputation on the same subject, they will be heard together. And the provost, in this case, that would be you as the convener of the meeting, convener, will decide how much time to allow that deputation. So if they are combined, then it's up to the convener of the meeting to decide how much time to allow the parties to be heard. Thank you, convener.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, in all fairness, I think we have an opportunity here for both the agent and the applicant to go up together, and we'll give them a maximum of 15 minutes for the two of them. I think that would be fair.
Convener,
Yes,
can I
sir.
just seek a clarification, please? Would the same standards be held for several objectors coming in with, for example, if several objectors wanting to have deputation requests.
So Mr. Henderson will come back in that.
That can be the case. Thank you, Councillor Sinclair. And I guess it all depends on the facts and circumstances. In this case, I think what we have is an objector, but also a deputation by an elected member. So I'm not entirely certain of the commonality there, but maybe that's something that will develop during the course of the deputation.
Yes, sorry, just to clarify, it was more for the process of deputation requests, not specifically on this application per se. But it's good to have that clarification that the same standard can be held for anybody who requires to make a deputation request. Thank you for that.
Well, what you usually find, especially in the, like say, predetermination hearings and that, but always ask that the objectors maybe put forward maybe one or two people, or there's quite a number, but that's a very valid point, sir. Thank you. Okay, then I'm going to start again, just for clarity here. An application has been made by Andrew Kayla, the agent, to be received as a deputation. We've agreed that. An application has been made by Sally Ann Kelly, the Aberlour Trust, the applicant. So we've agreed that the two of them will go up together, and they'll have an opportunity between the two of them for a maximum of 15 minutes. We've agreed that?
Agreed.
And we now have an application been made by Councillor Sarah Patrick, a local member, to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. Are we agreeing to hear the local member? Agreed. Thank you very much. An application has been made by Roman Watson Fargay, an objector, to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. We agreed to hear this objector.
Agreed.
We've agreed to that. Okay, that's fine. So in accordance with Standing Orders 33.5, the committee has decided to hear all the deputations. Thank you very much. Now, the first part of this application will be the report by our officer, Catherine Chorley. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Convener. Jack, if you could show the proposed parking plan, please. And you'll see that on this plan, it shows the proposed parking layout, the site frontage, and there are pictures of the property towards the bottom of the page. Thanks, Jack. So the first report provides a brief update following our visits to the property. You can find the original report at Appendix 1, and this includes a detailed description of the site, noting the proximity to residential properties and the adjacent community hospital to the north. Paragraph 1.2 gives a breakdown of the existing use class and the proposed use class, noting that a house or Class 9 use can include up to 5 residents living together as a single household where care is provided to the residents. The application is for a Class 8 use, which includes the provision of residential accommodation and care to people in need of care other than that covered by Class 9. This is a relevant fallback position for the applicants and is considered further in the report. The application was called in by Councillor Patrick, and the reasons are set out at 2.1. The consultation responses are set out in section 4 of the report, and no objections have been received through this consultation process. The public representations are summarised at section 6 and considered in further detail from paragraph 7b.6 onwards. A number of comments received relate to the proposed end user. The end user is not a determining factor in the assessment of the planning merits of the case. It would, however, be relevant to the equality assessment, which is covered in more detail at section 8. The proposed development has been assessed against the relevant policies in the National Planning Framework 4 and Local Development Plan 2. The detailed policy assessment is contained in section 7 onwards, with material considerations following on from that. It is our recommendation that planning permission be granted for the change of use, subject to the conditions outlined at the end of the report. Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you very much for that. So now an opportunity for the application that's been made by Councillor Sarah Patrick as a local member to come forward first as a deputation. Just come forward, Councillor Patrick, just take your seat. Just press the button for your microphone, keep it quite close to you so everybody can hear, and then you'll have your 10 minutes starting from now. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for agreeing to hear my deputation, and also thank you for taking time to carry out the site visit. I think it's particularly important in this property that you could really see the location at the very bottom of a short cul-de-sac, but within a shared common access driveway. I think that's an important, that really didn't, to me, come out on the plans, and you had to see that in person. I called in this application after being approached by a number of constituents, all concerned about the effect that the change of use of 15 Windsor Drive from a family home to a residential institution, okay, a care home, would have on this long-established, quiet residential area. The summary of the objections is, of course, in your papers, and I appreciate that many of the concerns raised, whilst entirely valid, are not issues which can be taken into account under your remit as a planning committee. However, they do show the strength of feeling of those who live, particularly in the Windsor Drive and Garthouse Drive area, that their home area is going to be changed, and not for the better, by the Aberlour proposals. And with great respect to the work and opinion of Catherine as the planning officer who prepared the report, I do think that this proposed change of use is contrary to policy HC07 of the Local Development Plan 2. And for example, looking at the report at 7A13, it states that the development sits on the edge of a residential area, and I don't think that's the view of those who live there. I live really quite close by to this area, and it's in the centre of a residential area, not on the edge. Yes, it does share a common boundary with the community hospital behind, but there's no direct access to the hospital from this Garthouse area. You have to go down Garthouse Drive, Major's Lawn, right round the corner. And I don't think people who live there actually think that they live beside the hospital. They live beside the gardens behind, quite extensive grounds that are behind the buildings, but not directly onto actual buildings. And it's that lack of neighbours that behind actually is one of the, in fact, the attractions of the area. So it's really in the centre of a residential, albeit with the community hospital grounds that are behind. And 17A13 also goes on to point out that the introduction of uses which would be incompatible with the residential character and amenity of the area will generally not be permitted. And I think this change of use of what's just been a family home into this care establishment would change the residential character and amenity of the area. And therefore, I don't think it should be permitted. The residential character of the area will be changed where you've got a property that's going to have 2 members of staff on site at all times, where there's a consulting room for outside professionals to come in and attend to residents. And these residents are going to change on a regular basis. And the residential character is changed where a property needs to have 8 parking spaces, with the resultant additional traffic across this shared driveway down at the bottom of the cul-de-sac on a 90-degree angle turn of 2 roads. So I disagree with the conclusion at 7A15, and instead I share the opinion of those who've taken time to lodge formal objections that the quality of the residential environment around their homes will be significantly impacted by this change of use. The proposals by Aberlour for the facility, I don't doubt that it will be run very well, and I have met with Sally Ann and colleagues, and I really don't doubt how well it will be run and the validity and the asset this would be to the Falkirk area. It's simply the wrong location. It might be the correct actual physical house, but this house is in the wrong location. And I think the best person to actually explain that impact in further detail is the immediate neighbour at number 13, Mrs Watson-Fargy, who's also here today. And convener, I don't really propose saying more because I think it's more important that you've actually got the immediate neighbour who I think represents many of the other objectors to give you her more specific concerns about the actual property location, if you like, and how that would affect her and the other residents in the area. So I would like to give her time to to speak now, thank you. But thank you for hearing my deputation.
Well, if you just sit there, Councillor, we'll have an opportunity now for any member of the committee to ask you some questions. The objector will be coming up next, and there'll be an opportunity for her to summarise her objection and go through the same process but questions. But this time is you've given us your summary in relation to the application which you called in, and it's now an opportunity for members to ask the committee to ask any questions of Councillor Patrick. Any questions to Councillor Patrick at this stage? Either here or remote? No questions? Just to clarify, no questions? Okay then, thank you.
Thank you.
You're excused. Thank you very much. Just checking, Councillor Murtagh, are you still with us? No. Okay then.
I am, convener. I'm just having some technical signal difficulties. So it's better to keep my camera off if I can hear better, unless I'm speaking. That's all right.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay, then it's an opportunity now that an application has been made by Romaine Watson Fargate, an objector, to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. I would just ask the objector to step forward, please, take their seat, and then they'll have 10 minutes to put forward their objection. Thank you very much. Keep that, well, you keep that close to you because it's sometimes difficult to hear if it's not. Yeah. Right, okay. We'll get 10 minutes from now. Thank you very much.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Mrs. Watson Fargate and I live at 13 Windsor Drive, which is situated next to the proposed Aberlour development. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and I'm here on behalf of the 16 objectors to this proposal. We wish to raise significant objections that warrant your consideration, and in the time allocated, I will outline our reasons for these, which I hope will contribute to a well-informed decision by the committee. Most importantly, one that aligns with the best interests of the neighbourhood. While we understand the importance of providing rehabilitation services for those in need, we strongly believe the chosen location raises significant concerns and issues. In section 4.1 of the agenda, it is inaccurate to state that the road accommodates two-way traffic. I have lived here for over 40 years and it has never been used as such. The entrance through the cul-de-sac narrows and will only allow movement for one car. Before this point, the roadway has residents parked cars on either side. This will create a major congestion if 8 added cars are trying to move on the same road. In section 4.2, Aberlour has stated that the house would always retain a family dwelling aesthetic. We certainly do not feel this is possible with 8 cars parked in front and outside of the house, large commercial bins which we think that they will have to use at the front, and the amount of visitors, medical staff and cars using the cul-de-sac. Section 6 we feel has other inaccuracies. Firstly, number 15 is not relatively distant from my property. It is right next door. There will be a huge impact on our privacy and sleep, as 2 of our bedrooms have windows facing directly onto the property. Noise will be a significant factor too, as 3 of the parked cars will be right next to our boundary wall, with the other 3 close by. This will be unbearable as shifts change morning and night. Section 7A.14. As we previously stated, it is fact and not a possibility that the volume of traffic will increase. We are also contained within this private cul-de-sac, so all traffic will need to enter and leave directly in front of my property. The volume of staff visits, health care and medical workers and visitors will impact on our privacy and turn a lovely quiet private road into a noisy busy one. Again, contrary to the definition of a family dwelling, and will completely change the aesthetic of the area. Regarding section 19, we feel that HC10 is very much favouring the proposal and not the existing neighbourhood, of which there is absolutely no mention. Any local development plan should strongly consider and listen to the people who live in these communities, as it will ultimately have an effect on their lives. We also disagree with the report given by the Roads Development Unit regarding access during winter weather. After many years living here, it is a well-known fact that the corner of Garthouse Drive and Windsor Drive can be impassable in winter, with cars being abandoned because they cannot drive up the hill due to the icy winter conditions. Gritting is never done here, leading to even more problems. Another concern is the storage and removal of commercial and council bins. We take it commercial bins will have to be used because of the number of people using the house. As there is no access at each side of number 15, bins will have to be stored at the front of the building. At present, the council lorries cannot manoeuvre down the cul-de-sac, so bins have to be moved up the road outside of the cul-de-sac onto the pavement at number 11. If both council and commercial lorries are being used, this will cause total congestion. Also, the owners of number 11 do not wish large commercial bins parked on the pavement in front of their home. We would also like to address drainage problems, which have been an ongoing problem at number 9, 11 and 13, which the council have been informed of several times and cannot seem to resolve. We feel that with the added toilets which are being installed, amounting to 10 in full at number 15, this will cause further problems for the infrastructure. In section 7b.20, Aberlour states it is not envisaged that antisocial behaviour or crime would occur. The use of this word gives us no confidence that Aberlour can verify this statement to facts. This is an extremely worrying for the community of the area. Section 7b.47 states there is a high-level fence separating number 13 and 15. There is no fence. As for the drawings in this section, we feel they do not give a precise concept of parking. They only show stationary vehicles and lack any detail around manoeuvrability of them. They also do not consider the access and exit of delivery vans, which even at the present moment is causing problems. Vans have to reverse back up the road, which is dangerous, or turn into our driveway, which we are not happy with. To conclude, we note that the objectives of Aberlour is to integrate with the community, but with 16 objections, that is the whole street and more, it is unlikely that they will achieve this in our view. Thank you for your time, and we hope the committee will listen to their constituents and come to a fair decision.
Okay, thank you very much for your summary. Is well put. It's now an opportunity now for members of the committee, both here and in remote, to ask any questions in relation to what you've just told us. I'm opening it up there. Any questions? Councillor Colley? Councillor Colley?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Hear you now, yes.
That's great. I just had a quick question, two questions. One was in relation to the narrowing of the road, and you mentioned that there was difficulties getting vehicles in and out, that it narrowed to one. Is that a physical narrowing? And I don't quite know the right word for it. Is it almost like a chicane sort of, or is it actually the physical characteristics of the road?
Yes, it does narrow physically. There are two pillars at the entrance of the cul-de-sac, which causes the narrowing. So therefore, it's only possible for one car to go through at a time. It's not possible for two.
That's great, thank you. And I just wondered if you might be able to just give a little bit more information on the issue of drainage problems that you mentioned.
Yes, the three houses, my house including, have had terrible problems with actually drainage of, it's actually coming up from the drains, out of the drains, overflowing with sewage and just completely overflowing and covering the road. The council have been informed of this. They've been out several times and they don't seem to be able to resolve it. Number 11 and number 13 actually have involved Scottish Water. They can't find any solution because of sewage coming through as well. Number 9 have actually privately, because the council can't seem to do anything and it takes so long to come, they've actually had to privately get companies in to try and resolve this.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions at this stage? Just on that question, then I'll come back to Catherine in relation to the drainage. What's the situation for your perspective on this problem?
The application for the change of use wouldn't normally warrant a consultation with Scottish Water. It's below the threshold. So I think it would be quite difficult to take that into account in determining a planning application where it's below the threshold for a consultation. I don't know whether Ian Dryden has anything else to add on to that.
No, I'd just like to add and reiterate what Catherine has said. This is a change of use of an existing property and there was already established. And this is not, there is a point raised about the degree of intensification, but Catherine's correct and on balance, this is not deemed to be a material consideration.
Okay, thank you. It's an important issue, so that's how I brought it up there, as it was brought up during the summary by the objector. Is there any, at this stage, is there any more questions to the objector? Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. And I may ask this question from some clarity from officers, but I wonder whether the objector has had the ability to look at her own deeds in terms of the burdens that are in her property that might apply to other properties in the street, including her own and the application property, about what it says in terms of if there's a condition that it would only be a residential property. And I just wondered whether, it's difficult unless we go and access and pay for those records, which we might have done. But I wondered whether she herself has any awareness of what it says in her own title deeds about the amenity of the street.
I have spoken to my solicitor. There doesn't seem to be anything in the deeds as of the change of use. The deeds were made up quite a few years ago. So unless it's a blacksmith or a candlestick maker or something like that, then that's the only thing that applies. So there doesn't seem to be anything really in control or objecting to that.
Councillor Murtagh, I'm bringing in, that's a very interesting point. I'm bringing in legal representative, Mr. Henderson, to see if we can shed any light on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. And in general terms, title deeds and title restrictions are not a material consideration that would be taken into account. They can be varied discharged by the Lands Tribunal, etc. So we would normally not consider that. Where it could come into play is even if planning permission were to be granted and a restriction could then be relied upon by a neighbouring proprietor, they could pursue action through a different route than the planning process. But yes, generally, for instance, even lack of ownership of an application site or title conditions are not matters that the planning committee would consider, which is considering whether or not development or use of lands in the public interest, essentially.
Convener, through you, I'm grateful for answer, and I might ask in the body of the main report some questions about that. It's just because in their report it talks about a sort of fallback for the applicant, which who's going to come on now. So I wanted to clarify that now, because this is an application for a change of use from a Class 9 to a Class 8, and I think it's important to understand if that's in a report as a kind of relevant background information, then what the parameters are about, you know, if something is would to be remain as a class 9, then what routes of objection the applicants or the residents might have. So I'll, you know, embroider that and ask questions relevant to that during the report. But I just wanted to ask the objector themselves what they were aware of, and they've confirmed obviously they've been to their solicitor and what they know themselves. So it's helpful for the context to know that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for your input. I don't think there's any more questions from the objector. We can ask her to take her seat. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. The committee has decided that they will hear the agent and the applicant both together. If they would like to come up and take their seat there, they'll have 15 minutes between them to put forward their summaries. Thank you. And then there'll be an opportunity to stay there when you're finished, and members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask any relevant questions. Okay, so could you just introduce yourselves first to the committee before we start?
My name is Sally Ann Kelly. I'm the Chief Executive of the Aberlour Childcare Trust.
Thank you.
And my name's Andrew Kayla. I work for Wellwood Leslie Architects and I'm representing Aberlour.
You want to bring that microphone a bit closer to you? Thank you. Okay, then you can start off with the agent probably first, and then it's up to you, but you get 15 minutes between you.
I think Sally Ann's going to talk first.
That's fine.
To give a brief introduction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, we won't take 15 minutes, so give a very quick overview of Aberlour Childcare Trust. We are a national Scottish children's charity, the largest solely Scottish charity. We have a rich history of providing residential care for children and some adults, amongst other services. Within Falkirk Council, we have been active in providing services for over 35 years. Prior to the change in policy in relation to funding of addiction services, we provided significant services in Glasgow for women and children affected by substance misuse. And we did that for well over 20 years, very similar model in terms of the care that we would be providing from Windsor Drive, but on a much bigger scale. So you will all be aware of the national emergency in relation to drug deaths. Your own communities have been affected by those drug deaths, with 23 people dying in 2022 within the Falkirk area. And we're very committed to the cross-party support actually for reducing drug deaths. And this is part of our proposal. We already have an existing facility in Dundee that we opened last year, and we've been working with mothers and babies on the same basis as we would be proposing to do in Falkirk very successfully. One of the things that I would say as a charity, we are very well respected at a national level and at local level. All of our services are regulated services in terms of residential provision by the Care Inspectorate, and our employees are registered with SSSC in terms of professional registration. But over and above that, we take great pride actually in working in communities and with neighbours where we have residential houses. And we actually do have significant evidence of work being done to develop positive community relationships. Myself and Liz Nolan, our director, spent a couple of hours speaking to Mrs Watson-Fargo and Councillor Patrick, hearing what the concerns were in relation to the development of the house, and agreeing to disagree on some of the concerns. But it was a very helpful meeting from my perspective, and it allowed us to think about the care and attention that we will need to put in place in terms of supporting community relations. What I would want to say is that the house that we are looking to purchase, we will want to retain in terms of its look as a family home. We will only accommodate a maximum of 4 women with their babies. The children will be under 5 years of age, and they will be 24-hour staffing in place, usually 2 people per shift. So that is the kind of scale of what we are providing. We have got very clear practice guidelines that we use, and as I say, we see this as a really integral part of what we already do within Falkirk and the Forth Valley. We have spoken to partners within the council and within the health board to get support to get their views on this development, and they are very positive about the development. But we and we've also given a commitment to Mrs. Watson-Fargy that we will continue to liaise with her on her wishes. If the planning proposal is accepted, we would want to try to have an ongoing relationship to resolve any issues that arise. But we are pretty confident as an organisation, because of our experience through the last 30 years, that our services are provided in a professional way. They do not cause disruption in local communities from an antisocial behaviour point of view, or in terms of accessing our services. We would be very, very mindful. I know that Andrew will look at issues that have been raised in relation to bins, etc., and offer reassurance to committee and to the local objectors about our plans for that. But we would want committee to give this a full assessment, and would urge you to support the application for planning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. Just wanted to add to what Sally-Ann said. The tenants that'll live in the property, they're quite far on in their journey of their recovery. They're not, the people that are living there have agreed to come there under their own, under strict agreements that they're in a better place and they can move forward with their life, and there's a commitment between the tenant and Aberlour that that's going to happen, and it's a short-term period, over sort of 6 months, so you can kind of guess where they are and how the building's going to be managed by Aberlour. But I would also like to just address the reasons the application has been brought before the committee. The concerns raised by Councillor Patrick are the reasons it's been brought here in the first place. Councillor Patrick has noted the application is contrary to HC07 and HC10 of the Local Development Plan. HC7 states the existing residential environment should be safeguarded, and the introduction of uses which are incompatible with the residential character and amenity of the area will not be permitted unless the proposals are an appropriate community service. And as demonstrated by Aberlour, they are providing a vital community service. The proposals are for residential use class in an existing residential area and therefore don't contravene the planning policy. HC10 states residential care will be permitted where the location is an appropriate residential environment, which it is, has good access to public transport, which it does, is of a scale and character of the site, which it does, and has sufficient amenity space. The proposals will not change the existing proposed characteristics and therefore do not alter the existing environment. The existing property has good transport links and a great amenity space and therefore complies with HC10. Aberlour have chosen this site as its existing large residential property in an existing established community, and Aberlour will continue to use it as such. This is all set out in the planning report and confirms that it is compliant as set out in the local development plan. So that's really what I wanted to address today, is we are compliant with the policies that are set out there, and we've made sure of that before we put the application in. If there's any questions that you have about parking or bins or anything else, we're happy to discuss that.
Well, I think the question's already been put to you in relation to the bins, and we just want to, if you want to expand on that issue at the moment and the access during your submission.
What will happen is Aberlour will employ a contractor to collect the bins, and as part of that, they can request smaller lorries or pickup vehicles to do that. Again, you'll have already been on the site, you'll have already seen the narrowing of the road, but the narrowing of the road is still significant width that vehicles can manoeuvre around there in terms of turning heads, turning circles, things like that.
Okay, is that you finished your summary, both of you? Okay, that's fine. If you just sit there, there's enough now for members both here and remote to ask any questions. Any questions at this stage? Councillor Flynn, then Councillor Kerr, Councillor Nimmo and Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Convener. Just a straightforward question regarding the parking. Although 6 places would be set up for cars, does the applicant envisage that these would all be used by staff, or do they expect that the women that come to stay with their children, do they normally have cars based on your Dundee experience? I'm just trying to get a picture of whether there's likely to be 6 spaces full every day, or could it vary from 1 to 6? Thank you.
First and foremost, 6 spaces is more than enough that's required for Aberlour. We were asked to add 2 additional spaces from the roads department. The tenants that live there will not have their own vehicle. They will be driven to appointments and wherever they need to go by members of staff.
Right, so what you're saying really, I'm assuming, is it's highly unlikely that there'll be 6 spaces occupied all the time. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. Leading on from Councillor Flynn regarding the parking spaces, where they've been designated spaces, and it was handy to get a visit to see the full characteristic of the site. Where the garden is and where the children's play area is at the front, will that be remaining, or will that be taken away for turning space?
Yeah, the existing play area is the existing owner's equipment. That won't be staying because the tenants would need, and children that will be there will need, a secure back garden, so the front garden will just be general landscaping. And if required, allow space for the turning, as you've asked.
Okay, the next question is with regards to Aberlour. Have you any other houses or facilities in the Falkirk area?
So we have a number of services in the Falkirk area supporting children and families, including the Langley's Family Centre, and a number of community-based support services. We have one where we support women with mental health issues and pregnancy, our perinatal service. We also have an intensive perinatal, which is specifically for women with addiction problems who are pregnant, and we support women up to a year after birth. And we also have an early years outreach service within Falkirk, but we don't have any children's houses at the moment or other residential establishments in the Falkirk area.
Okay, thank you. My other 2 questions was answered regarding the commercial bins and the drainage. So thank you very much.
Okay, it's an opportunity now for Councillor Murtagh. And did Councillor Nimmo have his hand up? No? Okay, Councillor Murtagh, it's you. Thank you.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Convener. Some of my questions have already been answered, but on the bins, just to clarify, because you mentioned there that about requesting smaller size of vehicles and adequate turning space. So from your understanding, then whatever bins that are commercial bins will not be intending to be taken out to the main part of the road and put in front of number 11. Your intention as the applicant is to have them contained completely on site. And can you clarify, in terms of if they are large commercial bins, will they be contained on site in the front of the garden and landscaping, or how do you propose to change that in terms of character?
Yeah, I think what would happen is obviously Aberlour would employ a company like or a third-party company to come and collect them. We can look further into that, how we'll hide them, out of sight, so they're not obviously visual. But yes, they would come onto the property to pick them up. That's what would be agreed.
Okay, thank you. More substantively, I suppose, as I mentioned in my previous question, it sort of implies in our report that, for example, if there wasn't planning permission granted, that there would be potentially a fallback of looking at maintaining a Class 9. And I wonder whether that's something which officers themselves have put into the report, or do you have in your mind the kind of this is the proposal is for this number of residents to be on site, which is obviously very valuable to have that capacity. But if, for example, for whatever reason permission wasn't obtained, could your proposal be adjusted to have a less number on site, or is it a case of this is the proposal, this is what your requirements are, and just to clarify exactly how many adults and infants, as it were, in total would be your maximum capacity in this property?
Well, first and foremost, we put the planning application into, we're not trying to hide anything, we're not trying to change something, by the back door. So we've been upfront about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We haven't looked into that fallback position. It'll depend what happens today, obviously. And the maximum occupant capacity would be 10 in total, including staff and everything. But we'd said there was 4 mothers, 4 children, and there'll be 2 staff, really, as a general base. That's what that'll be.
Okay. Can I just say, sorry.
No.
Just in supplementation to what Andrew said, the maximum number of residents will be 8 on the assumption that there will be 4 mums with 4 babies. However, if any of the mums have more than 1 child, the number of women in the facility will reduce, because we would need to give that woman access to more than 1 bedroom. So that could bring the overall number down, depending on the number of children that any one woman has. But the children will have to be under age of 5.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we ask? Provost Bissett.
Thanks very much, Convener. So the young women that are going to be in the residential place, have they already detoxed, and this is to give them support before they go back into the community?
So we offer choice to women. Some women may be detoxed at the point of admission, but others won't be. And especially if women are pregnant, they may well be on a drug management programme or a drug reduction programme. But we will work with women on their individual choice. The evidence from our Dundee services and previously from our Glasgow services is that the majority of women choose to detox and become drug-free. But that's not a scenario that we force upon them. So we do have drug reduction programmes, detoxification programmes, and we support abstinence if that's what women want to look at.
And the idea is that you keep the family together, and when they're free, they would go back into the community and live productive lives.
Yeah, the whole emphasis of this is about trying to first, women are overrepresented in drug deaths. So it's about trying to reduce risks to women who have been involved in illicit drug use and problematic drug use. It is absolutely about trying to keep families together. And when we look at the population of women that we've supported in Dundee, there have been quite a number of children who have been removed from their mother's care and are currently either in the care system or supported in the extended family. And so, yes, it is about trying to make sure that where we can safely keep children with their mothers, then this is an opportunity to do so. And it's also an acknowledgement that the journey that women in recovery seek is probably, especially if they have children, has to be tailored to their needs in a way that general recovery services and addiction support services simply don't get tailored towards women with children.
And the centre that's in Langley's, I've visited that a few times, and I must say it's well run and integrate well with the community and give the mums and dads and kids down there a lot of support. And there's never been any particular issues at all. And I know you do a lot of good work for everybody, so well done on that front.
Thank you.
Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. You partly answered but my question, but that these people that have taken that step to go to recovery and they're on the right road there, have got their children in a single room. And if we're looking at 4 rooms in that matter, I'm assuming there'll be a treatment room, there'll be a kitchen, a general play area. Is that all the rooms that are required? And I'm probably more to the architect in this case, is that, or is there additional rooms? Okay. Okay.
Sorry, Convener, I'm not able to hear because the microphone's not on. Sorry.
I'll restart that. Sorry. Yeah, the garage has been converted, as you'll see from the plans, to an office space. There's already an existing large kitchen, dining, living, open plan, and again, that's things like that is what is drawn the Aberlour to the property. We're going to make a downstairs bedroom for anybody with mobility issues. There will be a consultation room for the tenants and the staff. We'll have to provide a staff bedroom upstairs. But there's very little that's changing internally, really. Yes, from the property.
Yeah, and that's probably the key where I'm going with it, and because you're talking about the not changing the property. Because I've been on the site visit, I saw how huge the house was, to be honest with you, and the big common area, and it was explained. Catherine again very well described how the garage would be changing to an office, and the residents, and that's probably the right way to call the people that are going to be there. My worry was there was going to be a load of rooms going in, and you could expand at a later point, and that's where I'm getting at. But what you've confirmed back to me is that you're keeping the bones of the house. You're putting 1 extra bedroom downstairs, and you're converting the garage. Yeah, would that be a good summary? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a maximum amount that we could possibly put in terms of what the requirements are for Aberlour and the staff. So yeah, it's small scale.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input, sir. Any other questions before we can ask them to take their seats? Okay, then, thank you very much. Just like to take your seats. Your hands up. You want to speak at this stage?
I'm just anticipating you move into the next stage, Convener.
Right, okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to ask a couple of questions before we go back to Catherine for an overview. A couple of questions to our officers. First one will be, I think it will be Craig Russell, in relation to the issue about if you give us an overview, because obviously there is concerns about the access and about how the width of it as it goes down to the bottom. And then I'll come to, I think it's Gary McGregor in relation to another issue, which is a main issue, is the opportunity for any flooding in that area. First of all, come to you, Craig, in relation, if you give us the council's perspective on the roads.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, there's been some mention made of the road narrowing. I think it's important to point out that there's a distinction between Windsor Drive, the road, and the private driveway that serves the application site and the adjacent property. Windsor Drive itself doesn't narrow. It maintains approximately 6 metres in width for its entire length. We commented, and the objector picked up that width is sufficient for two-way traffic. Now, we made that statement. That's a statement of fact. A 6 metre wide road is adequate for two-way traffic. Clearly, the objector mentioned that there can be occasions where residents will park on one or both sides of the road. That's the same in any situation. If should that happen, then yes, you won't get two-way traffic. The site is situated at the bottom of a cul-de-sac. As I mentioned, once you cross over the boundary between the end of the public road, you enter into a private driveway that serves the application site and the neighbouring property. That entrance area, it does narrow. That the narrowing happens on the private driveway element. We've obviously given comment. By the way, the narrowing isn't a concern to us. It's at the bottom of a cul-de-sac. Should there be an issue with a vehicle trying to enter while one exits, that may well happen at the moment while the building is in use as a dwelling house. If a vehicle has to stop and negotiate with another one, it's the bottom of a cul-de-sac. The consequences would be more severe. For example, if that were to occur on somewhere like Graham's Road, this clearly isn't Graham's Road. We're not talking about the same location. We've given comment to planning in relation to parking. You've heard the applicant and agent speak. This is a relatively small scale development. There's 4 tenants proposed. None of the children will have cars, and 2 members of staff. There were, I think, from memory, 6 parking spaces proposed initially. We asked for an additional 2. Those are shown on the proposed layout. In the event that parking can't be adequately or there isn't enough sufficient parking within the boundary of the site, then parking may well occur on street. There is already parking occurring on street, as is the case throughout the council area. Again, having regard to the location, it's at the bottom of a cul-de-sac. I appreciate it may be a change for neighbours, but in terms of from a road perspective, we're not overly concerned, Convener.
Thank you, Craig. You simplified the issue for members, I believe, in relation to what was being coming forward. I'll go to Gary McGregor now. Gary, you've been listening. Any issues, if you give us an overview in relation to any concerns about flooding?
Thanks, Convener. First of all, obviously this application has a change of use, so our flooding team were not consulted on the application. However, I have had a quick look when we were going through discussions there. So from our ASEPA flood maps, the carriageway to the bottom of properties 13 and 15 does seem to have a low to medium risk of surface water flooding. The road at these properties is not adopted, so obviously the committee was out on site and we'll see the change of construction on the carriageway. So the carriageway for properties 13 and 15 Windsor Drive is not adopted by the local authority. Obviously one of the deputation requested had noted a number of drainage issues and noted sewage, which is obviously a Scottish Water issue. I am not aware of any council issued drainage issues in that area. Obviously probably primarily because it's a private road at 13 and 15, but that's something I can discuss and bring back to you if you would need it with our roads maintenance team.
Okay then, thank you, Gary. As like Craig, you simplified the issue for us. We're just giving us up-to-date information. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. And just to kind of start on those roads issues, I suppose it is a very large house. I'm very glad that none of the children under 5 will have a car, which is a relief. But I think that the question about those who are intended to be residing permanently on site, they won't intended to have a car either. But so it really is about the issue of the staff and how many the movements of those vehicles coming in and out. Can I just ask either Mr. Henderson or potentially, from a roads, in terms of if this was a family dwelling, a normal family dwelling, there would be no necessarily like prescribed number restriction wise of the number of vehicles for the residents in a family home, or is there a kind of advised maximum or assumed maximum? I know there's a planning assumption, but in terms of if this was to stay as a family home and you had, as I do, some vastly growing up older teenagers who may wish to have a car and are not getting one, how many would be reasonable? You could have potentially 4 or 5 cars for a family, for example. Can you kind of see what the legal position is on that?
We'll go back to Craig. I think Craig will have the expertise knowledge for that question. Craig?
I think I might disappoint you then, convener. The council has a team called the Transport Planning Unit, and if for example we were discussing a development of 200 houses, for example, the Transport Planning Unit would consider the number of houses proposed, they would consider the size of those houses, and they would come up with a sort of trip rate per house. And that would then determine, the size of the roundabout or whether 2 roundabouts are required, that sort of thing. So in answer to Councillor Murtagh's question, yes, there will be a sort of unexpected trip generation per standard house. But as Councillor Murtagh mentioned there, she has a growing family. I have neighbours who have the same size of house as me and generate a lot more vehicle movements than my own house does. So, the differences between even identical properties. The Transport Planning Unit, there is a threshold for them to become involved in consultation. That threshold is, off the top of my head, 50 houses, maybe something like that. They wouldn't be involved in development of this scale. So it's out with my remit to tell you whether this application will generate more traffic than the house before it. I couldn't do that if that's the question that the councillor is trying to answer. I'll defer to Mr. Henderson for the legal comment.
Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Craig, and I wouldn't disagree with what you've said there. I think there are thresholds that different parts of the council will look at. This would appear to fall below that threshold, and indeed a domestic property can end up with quite a number of cars, especially these days with children, etc., having own individual cars, making journeys to and from properties. So I think in summary, probably nothing more to add to what Craig's already said there.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you. I think, it is a difficulty, and I would say, as the Provost said, I think Upper Lower, and from a personal level, do a very excellent work in the policies which were mentioned. I think I struggle to think of anybody around this table that would disagree with the need for these facilities or the policy intentions. And but I think one of the difficulties, either whether we're talking about what the intention is for bins, the intention is for parking, the intention is for the layouts, is that we are being asked to make decisions on a classification. And although the applicant at this time is Aberlour, the classification, as I understand it, would mean that should the plans change, and should somebody else wish to pick it up, that would be entirely possible, and therefore the nature of the facility, if it's given a different classification, that any organisation could, for their purposes, operate out of that property. So I suppose back to Mr. Henderson again about in terms of the clear intentions here to have a maximum occupancy in terms of the adults resident and the children, and had a really good and helpful addition about if there was an additional child for the resident, then the adult occupancy would decrease. In terms of putting those things in a planning condition with a note to enforceability and monitoring, how feasible is that if we were to say, well, this seems a reasonable proposal in terms of what's being put forward by this applicant, but given that it might not be this applicant that operates it in the end, how are we able to capture that within planning conditions?
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh and Convener. And I may pass over to planning colleagues. I think you've made a pertinent point that there's a lot of focus on the particular use and particular user of these premises, and I think it's correct to draw back to the point that the application is for a change of use, for use as a residential institution. And I think what you should be considering is the use in planning terms that's relevant for the considerations in this case. I may pass over to Catherine or perhaps Ian here to discuss conditions. Thank you.
Mr. Dryden.
Yeah, thank you, Gavin. I think Councillor Murtagh has raised some valid points. I think, as Mr. Henderson has said, I think clearly there's a lot of speculation, and I think I can understand why these questions are being asked. But we've got to go back to the use class and the definition of that. And we have to look at each property or situation and its individual merits. And clearly, this application before you, obviously, it's a Class 8 residential institution. But looking at the property, its size, it demonstrates that the operator, again, the operator really is not relevant to this application, but we have to look at the facts and degree, and anything that potentially could come forward, a change of different operators, we would look at that on its merits. And again, it will be dictated by the property as it stands, its capacity, and what can be done in terms of the building fabric, because any further alterations, extensions, would probably require planning permission in its own right. But again, that's not before us, so we have got to really restrict it to what's before us, but taking cognizance of that. In terms of conditions, there's tests of conditions. And again, actually restricting occupancy is difficult. There's reasonableness and there's enforceability. And I would discourage that is valid. We have to consider what's before us. And again, we just have to be mindful that there is provision in the planning legislation for any potential expansion, intensification, whether by the operator currently, should they be given permission, or somebody else. But again, it's also difficult to restrict the use class, Class 8, because really it's a Class 8, recognising it's a residential institutions, and really it's the site itself, and they will vary fact and degree across. And in this particular property, we have to have regard to the physical characteristics and constraints that are on it, and they by and large will dictate who may come in or how it operates now and in the future.
Thanks, Mr. Dryden.
Through you, Convener, I think this is the thing. In terms of Class 8, I suppose that's the question. The maximum occupancy potential of a Class 8 institution, if you like what's intended here. I mean, thinking out loud in terms of my own views as I'm forming them on this particular application, then I think there are reasonable balances within it, and it's there are good merits in terms of what's proposed and the kind of limits are proposed. But what is the limit for a Class 8 institution in terms of occupancy? Because I think there are issues. Obviously, we've heard about car usage, etc. Potentially, if we had a Class 8 occupancy where the residents did have cars, for example, and the staff did have cars, and there was an increased occupancy, I think it's important for the committee to understand what a Class 8 could actually permit in its entirety, so that we can make a better informed choice.
Mr. Dryden again.
Yeah, I think again this comes back to probably it's each case on its merits. And I think it's difficult to say what a Class 8 use will be. The circumstances of the site or the property that's subject to the application. And as it stands before you this morning, officers are of the view, you've heard from roads officers as well and the case officer, and the view is that officers feel as it stands just now for a Class 8 use that's currently being proposed, this particular property and its curtilage is adequate and demonstrates that, in the view of officers, that this will not have an adverse residential impact on amenity for this area. And in other words, this is an acceptable and compatible use for the residential character of this area.
Thank you, Mr. Dryden. Any other questions, Councillor Murtagh?
I might come back, and I want to have a wee think about what's been said and hear what others are saying. But I think that and it's in terms of whether we could condition things. I can see Mr. Dryden saying he would discourage things, but I think that in this case it might be quite important in terms of what could be conditioned. So I'll let others come in. Thank you, Convener.
Councillor Redmond.
Thanks, Convener. I think we've had quite a thorough debate on this. There was some valid points raised, which I think the architect and the applicant kind of addressed quite thoroughly. The officers have gave quite a swathe of recommendations that I'm sure will help to put things at ease. I think as well that it's very good to have this in the Falkirk area. And we heard about, you know, Scotland's drug crisis and this kind of Scotland, the Falkirk area as well. Even in my own family, we've been affected by it, which is something we feel quite strongly about. So I think it's good that we have this facility. It's here to support women and their children. Often, when women have children, it can be a real turning point for them. And they think, this is the chance for me. I'm going to get clean. I'm going to, and it motivates them. And I think it was an excellent point. And the Provost asked the question about it was keeping families together and keeping the children with them. That gives them the motivation to keep going and keep powering through. And I understand. I think there was some legitimate things raised, but I think they have overcome them. I think it'll be a real welcome addition, keeping families together. I think as well, there's a bit of stigma attached sometimes to people in recovery, which we've maybe seen coming forward today. But I think that Aberlour are doing great work to support them, and they're going to help them. And I really welcome this to the Falkirk area. So I'm going to move the officer's recommendation that we grant planning permission for this. Thanks.
If I could just hold on to you for a minute, because what we'll do is, before we go to the decision making, we'll just go back to our officer, Catherine. Catherine, you've been listening to the debate this morning. Have you anything to add before members take a decision on this?
No, I think you've pretty much covered everything. I would just say that the reference to a fence in the report was my mistake. It's a wall, not a fence, that runs along between the two properties, and the hard standing on that side of the wall is already in place. But I think everything else is covered in the main body of the report.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, Councillor Redmond, but Councillor Murtagh intimated that she had another question. So we'll go to Councillor Murtagh first and come back to you for your decision making. Okay, thank you. Councillor Murtagh, have you got any other questions then before we go to the decision making?
It will be more on the conditions, so I'll allow, well, you know, obviously it's Councillor Redmond to proceed with his motion, but I do think potentially I'm of a similar mind, but I do think maybe on some questions on the conditions about that.
Okay, Councillor Redmond.
I was just going to move the full recommendation at 9.1 of the report, which the officers have put forward.
Thank you for that. Provost Bissett.
Thanks very much, Convener. I'm certainly happy to support to second the motion. I would say that it will be welcome in the area. I think there are loads of issues with drugs that need to be addressed. But that aside, I mean, that property itself, if somebody bought it, they could move a family 6 or 7 in there anyway, and they would change bathrooms and things like that. You know, they would, and they could even run a business for it if they so decided. And the issue, the roads issue, it's a 6-metre road, and there isn't any particular issue with that. So I don't see, if a large family moved in, you'd have similar issues. I think it is probably more of a stigma. And Aberlour have given assurances that they'll have ongoing conversations, and they're a very professional organisation. As I mentioned earlier, they've worked well in Langley's, and there's never been any issues at all. They've always been very quick to communicate and discuss any issues that may be raised. So I'm happy to move to second the motion.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. I'm in support of what's already been said. However, on maybe slightly different lines. In reading the report in 7B52, it tells you about how the people are employed there, even if there is sleeping facilities, they are not defined as resident. So therefore, the potential on parking spaces is one of the things that was obviously been discussed here today. The 6 spaces, to me, I think would have been. I think Aberlour have worked to make sure there's 8 spaces allowed in here. And given that it's been confirmed that it's most likely that the people who are recovering here are not likely to be driving, and it is going to be basically possibly 2 staff and the visiting consultants. But well, unfortunately, one of my neighbours isn't too well at the moment, and there's consultants go to them quite regularly at this moment in time. So I think on the planning reasons. I can't find any planning reason here that would make me want to refuse this more than anything else, rather than the emotional thing. I've listened to council officers and I always accept their advice. I accept that there's a different interpretation from the objectors and from Councillor Patrick, but in this case, I agree entirely with the council officers. I don't see any reason to refuse this, and I can't even see any reason to put advisories on it. There is nothing I can see on that. The thing with the sewage that's coming up, that's more a building warrant problem. Maybe actually the work getting done in the house may actually end up helping that, because they'll end up having to do some more work on it. So I'm totally in support of the previous two councillors.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to clarify exactly where we are, we have a motion moved and seconded. But I've still got to go back to Councillor Murtagh. Still got her hand up. Councillor Murtagh, you've heard the motion being seconded. You've heard Councillor Bowes. So have you anything to add then before we finalise and come to a conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I can find no planning reason, which is an important reason why we're here. I can find no moral reason. I can find no emotional reason. I'm fully supportive. But what I can see is very clearly the classification change from that could potential, if there was a different facility which had equally a large number of permanent residents, but also a large number of occupants. And given we can't restrict the parking, that could be a concern and change the character of the residential neighbourhood as it is. So I suppose, and I would just note a concern that, and I think it's just so important in terms of planning terms, in terms of the validity of our decision making, that we never make a decision based on the intention of the applicant that's there. I've been reminded on previous applications there where I might have a contrary position on the applicant and maybe less favourable, that we're making a decision about a classification and anybody could operate it. So I'm not, in saying this, making a judgment on what's being proposed by this applicant. But in order to safeguard the concerns of the residents, which I think we have to take into concern, is there a way of saying we could put a maximum residential occupancy on it? So, for example, to say, 5 adults or whatever, or what's contained within this proposal, because I think that potentially would mean that should the operator change, that it's safeguarded some of the concerns that have been raised by residents. So I would feel comfortable if there was a way, and I'm happy to say that can be deferred to the Director of Place. But I think that it's
do you want to make at this stage, we're finishing, do you want to bring forward an amendment to this?
Well, no, I don't want to. I would be happier if the mover and the seconder were happy to say they would be happy with some sort of condition that recognised the concerns of the residents, that would put some sort of occupancy, at least advisory, on a maximum level, just because I'm not clear that the officers have said there is a maximum occupancy that's available for Class 8.
Okay, we're getting a wee bit complicated on this one, but I'm going to bring Mr. Dryden back in just to clarify this.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I think I can understand Councillor Murtagh's concerns, and obviously having heard the debate this morning, I think I would reiterate my point about Class 8 residential institution, which this is, will come in various sizes, degrees, different, and we have to look at this particular site, and I think by its very nature, it will have a limited degree of what can operate effectively if planning permission were to be granted to Class 8. And I think what's being considered and being proposed this morning probably shows and demonstrates probably on the layout plan in terms of the parking provision and actually the building fabric as it stands just now. We have to be mindful of what's before us rather than speculate that probably we're close to the saturation point of what's acceptable. And that in effect will govern any future potential change of operator or circumstance. And basically what has been granted here by implication will show the threshold, and then anything further can be looked at on its merits, because the test of conditions, or 6 tests of conditions, and really one of the conditions is necessity. And really by what we're saying here is, if there is, when you start to look at potentially conditioning it, you could argue then maybe it's not acceptable, and that's the point you've got to bear in mind, is what's before you today. And really, in terms of enforceability about restricting rooms, again, it's not reasonable, and you've got to be precise. So there's a number of tests which I feel what is being put forward, and I can understand why it's being forward. I don't think it meets the tests of putting an appropriate condition, and therefore I would have to recommend to the committee that a condition of that nature would not be accepted, and I think it would be ultra vires.
Okay, well, I'm happy with that, but I'd just say that I think I note some concern about just the classification, but I'm content with that.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Once again, we'll just clarify the situation just to conclude this. And by the way, it's been a very healthy, open and transparent debate. We have a motion moved by Councillor Redmond, seconded by Provost Bissett. Have we anybody otherwise minded, or can we agree the recommendation contained within the report and the formal movement of the motion by the 2 councillors? Happy to accept.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. On to item 6, Falkirk Council on-street parking space for disabled persons. It's a revocation, and it's pages 60 to 67, and the report will be by our officer, Craig Russell. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Convener. This report concerns the proposed removal of a disabled person's parking space on Avonbank Avenue in Grangemouth. It is not an application for planning permission. In terms of the Council's scheme of delegation, this decision requires to be made by committee as unresolved objections have been received to the making of the order. In terms of the relevant legislation, the authority requires to consider all objections made and not withdrawn before making the order. The space to be removed is shown on page 66, if you have the same papers as I do. Space 3 is to be removed. 3 objections were received and responded to. These are detailed on pages 65 to 67. 2 objections have not been removed, hence this report being placed before you.
Just open it up for members. I'd be quite happy to move the recommendation contained within the report.
Seconded.
Okay, anybody otherwise minded? Agreed? We all agreed?
Agreed.
Just on a point of quite technical issue, there isn't as such a recommendation one way or the other, as I recall. I think it's a decision of whether to make the order or not to make the order that's proposed. Thanks.
Okay, formally then, we'll make the order. I'm quite happy to agree that. Is everybody in agreement? And thank you very much. Just the terminology there. Thank you, sir. No, thank you. That takes us to item 7, the Falkirk Council on-street parking spaces for disabled persons. Various streets order 20, pages 68 to 75. Craig again. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Convener. This will sound familiar. This report concerns an application for a new disabled person's parking space on Bank Street in Slamanan. Again, it is not an application for planning permission. In terms of the Council scheme of delegation, this decision requires to be made by committee as an unresolved objection has been received to the making of the order. In terms of the relevant legislation, the authority requires to consider all objections made and not withdrawn before making the order. An application was received by a qualifying person and a suitable location identified. This is shown on page 72 of your report. 1 objection was received and responded to, as detailed on page 74. The objection has not been removed, hence this report being placed before you.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. Can I just ask Craig a question, Convener? Is this the only parking bay in the vicinity?
Convener, I'll just have a quick look for the councillor just now. It depends what the councillor means by vicinity, Convener. There is a single space in that location. There are additional spaces, perhaps 100 or 200 metres north or south. There isn't a row of disabled spaces at that location, if that helps answer the councillor's question.
It probably does, Craig. So is this bay already there?
So the application process for disabled parking spaces requires us to survey the location first of all, convener. We then have to mark an advisory bay. And to all intents and purposes, an advisory bay looks the same as a made bay. It's simply white markings on the carriageway. So the advisory bay has been marked. It is visible on Google Street View. You could drive by it and see it. So the advisory bay is on site. It is not a formally made disabled bay. That's the purpose of the report before you. However, as I said, the legislation that we work with requires us to identify and mark an advisory bay as soon as we possibly can. So yes, there is a bay visible on site just now.
Thanks, Craig. That was the reason I asked if there was anything close, because I visit and I go past that area probably twice, 3 times a week, and it's right in the corner. I understand the objectors' views. It is an area where it's right in the corner, a blind corner. I think if people seen the area, they would change their mind. I don't want to refuse anything. I understand where the objector is coming from, because I see it. I've had to stop, and I've nearly hit somebody coming round the corner. So is it a bad corner? I believe it is a bad corner.
We'll bring Mr. Henderson in at this juncture. Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, convener. And I think there is maybe some suggestion that members might benefit from viewing the site, and it was just to pick up on a procedural point around that. It is available for the members to view the site, but it is absolutely not available for that site visit to become a hearing on site at the same time.
Yeah.
There is, as the report written by Mr. Russell explains, if a hearing is requested, it's a matter that is then conducted by a reporter appointed from a list provided by the Scottish ministers, etc. It's a very formal process, but it is available for members just to view the site and see the physical characteristics. Thank you, convener.
There you are, Councillor Kerr. If you want to formally move to go to sites for a decision's taken.
I think it would be beneficial, and members of the committee would be able to see what I'm talking about.
Okay, I see Councillor Colley's got her hand up there. Councillor Colley.
Yeah, if you don't mind, could I ask a quick question just before that? And it's probably in the report, so apologies if I've missed it. The place where the disabled parking space is noted, if that were not to have a disabled parking space in there, just picking up on what Councillor Kerr said, is parking permitted or not permitted in that area on the main highway?
Craig.
Thanks, convener. So, yes, in short, parking is permitted in that area on the highway. And if I could give a little bit of the background to how these spaces are identified. When we receive an application for a disabled person's parking space, we survey the site and we try to locate the space where we witness the applicant's vehicle parking, which is what we've done in this case here. The applicant's vehicle was witness parking in that area, hence the space was identified to be provided in that area.
Okay. Councillor Colley, back to you. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Councillor Kerr, back to you. Are you formally moving a site or a hearing?
Aye, I would like a site visit that hearing.
I can't hear you. We can't hear you very well.
Yes, site
Okay,
visit.
fine, thank you. Okay, we'll go. I think Councillor Murtaugh's got her hand up again. Councillor Murtaugh, thank you.
I'll not shout into the microphone, but I suppose, picking up on Councillor Colley's point, the thing is that the road can be parked on, and the question therefore I have for Craig is, although you've said you've observed that that's where the applicant's vehicle has been parked, and that's why you've chosen that location, and clearly that is therefore a location that's convenient for the disabled person. Would there be another point which would be suitable both for the applicant and the that would be more conducive to road safety, or do you feel that there was no road safety concern in that particular area?
The point, convener, the point that Councillor Kerr made about the space being located on a corner is absolutely accurate, and motorists heading down the hill, they will see that space on the left hand side, and they'll have a decision to make as to whether they slow down, they stop, they try and view beyond that space, or whether they continue and drive past that space at the speed that they were travelling at. That situation isn't any different to encountering any other obstruction on the road. You know, drivers experience or encounter obstructions probably on every journey. In answer to Councillor Murtaugh's query, there may well be another location. There's a very short or a very low wall further up the hill from that space. So we couldn't locate the space next to the low wall. Obviously, people couldn't get in and out their car on the passenger side. We'd have to look further down the hill away from the bend, which obviously is taking the space further away from the applicant's property. So there may well be another suitable location that would address Councillor Kerr's concern. Whether it would then move away from being, well, it undoubtedly would be less convenient for the applicant, yes.
I think, and I respect that Councillor Kerr said in terms of going to sites, and that's with respect to road safety, which is obviously an important thing for all of us. I just don't feel that in the end that, you know, that there's no way that we, unless we were proposing to take to roads to put restrictions to not be able to park on that bit of the carriageway at all. I'm just not sure what the point of that would be. If the only other location would be less favourable to the applicant, but the applicant could still park at the place where it's actually proposed that we put the disabled space, I'm just not sure what the ultimate outcome would be different, and whether there's really any point in going. I mean, I just mean it from the point of view of saving the time. I respect why Councillor Kerr has brought it, so I would be more minded to say that we grant the order, just because I don't think it would change the material decision that we would have.
Councillor Kerr, I'm coming back to you. You've heard what's been said by other members. We're back to you just to finalise whether. Councillor Kerr?
I think when people seen the area, their minds would be changed. And
okay.
It could be located a wee bit further down.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Flynn before we come and get a decision made on this. Councillor Flynn.
Yep, thank you, convener. The one thing that's not clear from the map, well, there's two things actually. One is pretty obvious. We don't know the inclination of the road, i.e. does the road go up, down or whatever. It only shows you obviously an aerial view. It's not clear, convener, to which, and so apologies if I've missed it, it's been a long meeting, to which house the parking bay, disabled parking bay relates to, and also, same as any disabled person, we don't know the level of disability, at least I assume we don't know. So I do think, I've driven that road many times over the years, and I'm reasonably familiar with it, but I do think it would do no harm in this instance, for the sake of a couple of weeks, for people that want to go and have a look, to have a look. So I would support Councillor Kerr's motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Craig, you want to come back? In on the issues that Councillor Flynn made in relation to the question was who exactly is this application for?
Yeah, convener, I'll comment on that and probably look to Mr. Henderson for a bit of support on this one. Disabled parking spaces aren't made in the same manner as planning applications. They aren't registered on a public record, as far as I know. So the documents that we present to you, they shouldn't contain an applicant's name or address. The applicant may not wish that information to become public. For example, there may be various data protection issues that would mean that we don't want to sort of transmit or broadcast that information. So the plan before you, you're quite right, Councillor Flynn, it doesn't detail the applicant's information.
It was really more, Craig, apologies, convener, is it seems to overlap a couple of houses. That's the only point I was really making. And so if it was even due, then okay, most of it's related there. But if it was Stewartville, then it's slightly offset. Now, that was the only point. I wasn't really, obviously, and Craig understands this, wanting to reveal any data about the applicant there. And if it's possible to move it down, up or down the street to make it safer, because I think longer term, that's more of a concern, is safety, because obviously if it's a blind corner, there is a huge safety issue. Thanks.
Thank you, convener. And I would just echo Craig's comments around we tend to anonymise, as you would have seen in these reports, the information that's been provided. It isn't of the nature of a planning application. Just on the point of moving the space, I think this is something that the committee has looked at before. And my advice on that would be that I think we would need to go through a notification procedure again if the location of the bay was to change, because people have different views on these matters depending on where the bay is located, and particularly potentially in relation to their own properties. So I think if it wouldn't be a straightforward matter of just modifying to move the bay, I think there would be a refusal and then a re-notification. And I would maybe take Craig's thoughts on that at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Those would be my thoughts. I think, obviously these spaces are advertised, the intention to make or revoke a space is put on site on lighting columns. So, those near the lighting columns will see it, they'll speak to their neighbours. So I think Mr. Henderson's quite correct. We would, if committee decided to refuse or not make this order, that would be that order dead. We'd communicate that to the applicant, hopefully encourage a new application and start the process again, thereby allowing other neighbours, other interested parties to make comment.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair.
Thanks, convener. Mr. Russell advised earlier on that we could see the space and the proximity of the space as to where it was on Google Street View. I've taken the liberty of having a look at that myself to potentially mitigate my own necessity to go on any site visit that may or may not be required. I'm aware of the area, I'm aware of the space, but what's blindingly obvious to me is the fact that there appear to be no parking restrictions on this area of street. Which I think proves the point that whether or not the disabled bay was there, a car could be in that space causing an obstruction. Perhaps my wife would tell you something different, but I believe my driving skills are somewhat okay. And I think I could manoeuvre past any obstruction in that place without causing too much of an issue anywhere else on the rest of the road. That's not to say that other drivers may be perhaps more inclined to do something different, but I would be content to move that we grant the order.
Right. Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll just finalise the questions first, because obviously we've already had a motion to go to a hearing, which is a site visit. That was Councillor Kerr. We'll go to Councillor Murtagh then for the final questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose it's exactly what Councillor Sinclair said, is that if we didn't grant the order, because I feel like I understand the intention, but I think we're slightly missing the point here. So if we didn't grant the order, or if we didn't, after site visit, got moved somewhere else and was rescinded, a car could still park in exactly that space, and the effect of that, would it be less convenient for the disabled person who's made the application, because that would, they in their disabled space would be further away, but a car, another car, or their car or them could still park in that exact same space because there's no parking restriction. So I'm content to second Councillor Sinclair, but I would also note the point that also having Google Map on the screen and the 3D availability is really helpful. So it would be helpful if committee could do that. But I just think the effect will be that of going to sites won't actually, in effect, help at all the end outcome of this. So.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Councillor Kerr. Councillor Kerr, you've heard the debate. You've heard what everybody had said. All the members have been asking questions. We've had officers coming back. And so I'm coming back to you to see whether you're still going ahead with your motion for a hearing.
Well, like you always say, Convener, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Like you always say, everybody's got their own opinion.
Exactly.
And I'm quite happy to go to the site.
Okay, then we'll go back then to the start. We've got we had a motion formally moved by Councillor Kerr, but he never got a seconder. But in terms of openness and transparency, I'll second you for a site visit. Councillor Flynn, did you want to come in?
I did. Maybe wasn't heard clearly, Convener. I did try and second the motion earlier on.
Well, that's fine.
Comment. Apologies for that.
No, don't apologise. I remember that you did. So we've got a motion moved by Councillor Kerr to go to a site visit. We've got a seconder in Councillor Flynn. We've got an amendment and to agree to the order, to make the order by Councillor Sinclair, seconded by Councillor Murtagh. So we'll just go to the vote.
Thank you, Convener. And just to clarify, the motion by Councillor Kerr, seconded by Councillor Flynn, was to have a site visit.
Yep.
Purely a site visit. That was my note. We then have an amendment by Councillor Sinclair, seconded by Councillor Murtagh, to grant the order. This is one of these occasions which the committee will be becoming more aware of, where we engage with our standing orders, and in particular Standing Order 20.7. And the background to this standing order is there's a procedural unfairness if you start pitting procedural motions against substantive decisions. So what is provided in standing orders is that there is first of all a vote on the procedural matter, which would be a site visit, and that would be a vote on a for and against basis. So you would either voting for or against having a site visit. If the vote were to translate into a vote to have a site visit, that's what takes place and the committee goes to visit the site. However, if the vote is against a site visit, we then have the amendment, which becomes the substantive motion against which any other amendment can be put. So essentially, if it's for, then there is a site visit. If it's against, we're left with the position where we're not agreed we have a site visit, but we'll still get a decision to be made. And we've got, in that case, a motion to grant the order. I hope that made sense to everyone.
It does. I think we fully understand it.
I see a bit of nodding, which is reassuring. Thank you, Convener. So as I said, the vote at this stage is for or against having a site visit in this case. So Provost Bissett.
For.
Councillor Bowes.
Against.
Councillor Buchanan.
For.
Councillor Colley.
Against.
Councillor Flynn.
For.
Councillor Forrest.
Against.
Councillor Kelly.
Against.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Murtagh.
Against.
Councillor Nimmo.
Abstain.
Councillor Redmond.
Against.
And Councillor Sinclair.
Against.
We have 4 for a site visit and 7 against having a site visit, in which case we are now in the position where a site visit has not been agreed and we have a motion to grant the order before the committee. That was what was the amendment initially is actually now the substantive motion, and that was by Councillor Sinclair and seconded by Councillor Murtagh, and that was to grant the order. So as I mentioned, an amendment can be made against that motion in at this stage, and a decision still to be taken by the committee.
Okay then. It's been clarified where we are. Is there any amendment coming to the motion from Councillor Sinclair? None?
See anything?
Okay.
Case, yes.
Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just to clarify, there was without division agreement to grant the order in that case. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Convener, sorry to interrupt. Could Mr. Henderson just confirm that my abstention was recorded? He didn't mention it when he was reading out the result.
Very good point, Councillor Nimmo. You're quite correct. I apologise, and that will be noted in the minute. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. That takes us to item 8. The Falkirk Council on-street parking for disabled persons, various streets, Order 20, pages 76 to 83. And once again, we have Craig Russell. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Convener. This report concerns an application for a disabled person's parking space on Willowbrae in Brightons. It is, again, not an application for planning permission. In terms of the Council's scheme of delegation, this decision requires to be made by committee as an unresolved objection has been received to the making of the order. In terms of the relevant legislation, the authority requires to consider all objections made and not withdrawn before making the order. An application was received by a qualifying person and a suitable location identified. This is shown on page 80 of your report. One objection was received and responded to. This is detailed on pages 82 and 83. The objection has not been removed, hence this report being placed before you.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, I'm opening it up for members. How do we feel?
Happy to agree that
happy to agree the order should be made.
Certainly.
So we've got a motion moved and seconded to agree that the order should be made. Anybody otherwise minded? No. Total agreement. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your time and consideration this morning. That brings us to the end. And at this stage, it is the final meeting of the Planning Committee until next year, unless we have any emergency meetings being called.
Convener?
Yes.
I probably, because the meeting's finished, I want to bring this up. But probably like everybody else, I received an email regarding 2